Hi, and welcome to the Foundations for Change video series, brought to you by the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. In this video, David Nash from the Zurich Foundation will explain how resilience measurement is foundational to good programming and not only helps to track change over time, but supports evidence-based decision-making and builds capacities.
I'd like to take you back just a little bit to the beginning of our work in flood resilience back in 2013-14. When Zurich first decided that this was a topic that we wanted to work with, we kind of set out to improve community resilience to flooding. And at the time, we had absolutely no idea how we were going to prove that we had improved communities' resilience to flooding. Resilience is a notoriously slippery concept, something that is very fuzzy around the edges, something where if you take 10 resilience experts and put them in a room, you'll get 15 different definitions for resilience coming out of. It's really hard to get hold of. We also at the time couldn't find, and something that was demonstrated a little later with a piece of research that UNDP did, we couldn't find a mechanism to be able to measure this slippery concept called resilience. In fact, there were plenty of papers around at the time that were saying that you can't measure resilience. Resilience is an incipient quality within a community that is just impossible to measure in itself. So we decided we'd set off on a journey to try and see what we could measure to demonstrate that we were having a positive impact. When you think about resilience, the kind of fundamentals of looking at a community that is more resilient is that when a disaster strikes, the outcomes that they face are better than they would have been if they didn't have resilience. So we're starting off from this whole premise that resilience has an outcome, that there is an outcome that we need to kind of look at. And that outcome comes from somewhere. It comes from what the community has and how the community functions to be able to provide it with those good outcomes. So we started off on this journey to try and create something that we could measure, something that is present within the community and something that can change over time, which in the long run will improve outcomes. And that led us to the FRMC approach, the flood resilience measurement for communities approach. It starts with a definition of what resilience is, which is this relationship between the risk and risk management and the development of a community, the way in which a community evolves in such a way that they mutually reinforce each other. It looks at what qualities within the community provide that and puts that all into the concept of the 5C4R model. Looking fundamentally at the different kinds of assets a community has, or the capitals, and looking to see which ones are contributing and which ones are fairly weak and therefore might not contribute towards that. By measuring change of the quality of those assets over time, we can see that the potential for improvement in the community's outcomes will improve over time. So that's the kind of the direction that the whole measurement piece set out at. And that fundamentally is where we intended to go with the development of the FRMC. However, when you start to deploy this model on the ground, what has become apparent, certainly over the last couple of years, and certainly in the learning that's coming out from the reporting that we're doing, is that it goes much beyond just simply an opportunity to measure potential outcomes. What we have found is that it also does two other things. Firstly, it supports good decision making in terms of what a community needs to do that could enhance its resilience. I'll come on to each of these in just a moment. And the second one is that it builds a depth of understanding about what resilience actually is in reality. A much more concrete view of what resilience is than the fluffy, fuzzy definitions. So how does it do that? What are we learning that kind of supports this contention that the resilience measurement approach isn't just about measurement? It will do a measurement of some sort, but it also adds this additional value. Well, the first thing that we learned is that by deploying this tool before we even start to think about what kind of interventions or solutions and make any decisions about what kind of interventions or solutions happens, really does help us to think this thing through in a concrete kind of way. We shouldn't underestimate ever the value of early analysis of the situation before we start making decisions, and having the scope and the flexibility to deploy this approach, to look in depth at where a community is, to help identify the strengths and the potential gaps that there are within the makeup of this community, really does help us to understand fundamentally what potential options there might be for development. There's always the kind of knee-jerk reaction. We all have our set piece interventions that we've tried and tested in multiple places, but do they really work in all situations? What this tool does and what this approach does, which is coming out in the evidence from a number of the teams that are reporting on this, is that it really helps us to really understand that difference between a strength and a gap, and how they interact and what potential we have for being able to overcome some of those gaps, and be much clearer about the way in which that works. It's all done in a very participatory way as well, and in the sense of bringing a sense of ownership with the community that we're working with. So really identify the gaps that are important to the community as much as anything else. One illustration for kind of how this has really helped is that we have successfully had the tool embedded into a partner's work who is outside of the Flood Resilience Alliance. The Lutheran World Relief Project on the border between Nepal and India, for example, started off liking the look of the tool, implementing the tool in 3 or 4 pilot communities, and eventually trebling the number of communities that they applied the tool to, not necessarily because of the measurement angle, which is where they started, but simply because it was demonstrated to them how it could support better decision making on the ground. What that is kind of illustrating, I think, is not only that we're able to quantify where the gaps are and where the strengths are, but it's also enabling us to connect that knowledge together, to be able to understand how those pieces of information interact, where they reinforce each other or undermine each other, and by doing it in a participatory way, connect that to what the community really needs. So instead of just making a guess as to the best approach within a community to what they need, it really does engage the community in an in-depth way to really analyse the situation on the ground in partnership with the community, and to evolve an understanding about what options come out from that kind of depth of discussion within that. Ultimately, it connects this understanding to the community's need, and so we're addressing real needs and not ones that we potentially imagine. And that kind of leads us to a wider application of this whole kind of picture. So at a community level, it's quite straightforward to see that by really understanding where the strengths and weaknesses of the individual community lie, the needs of that community can come out, and whether that need can be satisfied within the community by harnessing the strengths of that community itself to overcome some of the weaknesses, or whether we need to go outside of that community and lobby for an external influence, comes out from the analysis within this tool. So it enables us to really focus in on what we can do with the community and what we can do with the community to advocate for change outside. And when we take that collectively across a cluster of communities within a district, then that can really turn into some powerful information that we can take to larger, more municipal kind of stakeholders to look to see where we can get that information to leverage input from the authorities. Municipal authorities in Nepal, for example, the work that Practical Action have done in Nepal, have been able to adjust their fiscal plans and allocate budgets specifically around resilience building based on what is coming out of the work that we're doing with communities in that particular region. The information that's coming from the tool collectively is making a sound argument for change for the way in which those budgets are allocated, which is a real success story and part of what we're trying to drive through the whole of the programme. In terms of the other side of this coin, and you can see this kind of diagram. On the one side, you've got all of these pieces moving together. On the other side, you've got this opportunity for building capacity. Now, the Alliance is a learning organisation, and we learn in a number of different ways. We learn deliberately by going to learning events, or we can learn by experience and through experience. The very fact of the way in which we deploy this tool in the first place is a learning opportunity. Building and designing data collection questionnaires forces us to think about what the data is asking for and how best to get that data and why we need that data in the first place. And all of that helps to build a good understanding of the sources that underpin where resilience comes from. Looking at the different kinds of data collection methods and where we get data from exposes us to a number of different viewpoints of that data, which means that we get different perspectives and can build a rounded understanding of what it's telling us, again, helping to build our capacity and our knowledge. And when it comes to interpreting, grading and analysing that data, we have yet another opportunity to really kind of build our understanding of where resilience comes from and how we can behave to try to enact it. The first kind of element of this building capacity thing is that it really does support the way in which we're working to build and develop our knowledge. But it's not just our knowledge that we're building and developing. It's also around building a relationship at a community level. We do this in participation with the community. It's not something that we do to the community, it's something we do alongside the community as genuine partners in their development. It's their priorities that are coming out from this. It's their perspectives about what's important that's coming out from this. And that's a really key part of why we are able to learn what goes on the ground. We not only, the process of going through this not only helps build the capacity for practitioner teams, but it also builds an understanding of where resilience comes from at a community level. And that in itself builds resilience. The other thing that it does is it really helps to foster this idea of systems thinking. Now, a community is a series of interlocking moving parts, much like this diagram is. Whatever you do in a community, whatever things you change in a community will have not just intended consequences. We intend to change this to make that happen. But because it's all interrelated with everything else that goes on in the community, it also has knock-on effects and potentially could change other things that you weren't intending to change. The very process of looking at this measurement piece enables us to think of the community in this interlocked, multi-dimensional kind of way. And by looking at where the different pieces fit together, particularly through the analysis process, we can start to see where we might have positive intended consequences, where we might have unintended consequences, which may prove to be positive or negative, which will help to temper or to change or to nuance what it is we do on the ground. These linkages between strengths and weaknesses enable us to also harness those strengths within a community to be able to make change happen and overcome some of the weaknesses and bridge some of those gaps. And that we find has been a really important thing that's come out about the way in which these things all interlink together. Interestingly, what that kind of shows is not necessarily that we would do we would implement a different kind of solution, but the solution we implement will be nuanced. It'll have differences around the edges because it will take into account what were previously hidden unintended consequences. And the last thing it does is it provides this learning environment, a learning for the community, a learning for the practitioner, and a learning when we take it outside of the individual community, a learning for the whole of the ecosystem in which we're working. What it does is it takes a very fuzzy, difficult concept in the nature of resilience and breaks that down into things that are concrete, that are real, that are things that we can tackle, that we know will have a significant impact on the community. So overall, we set off on this journey to try to measure whether we were able to increase resilience in the community. And what we've ended up with from the feedback we're getting from the practitioners on the ground is a tool that can do that, yes, but equally something that helps us to really build our understanding of resilience in a very concrete and practical way, to be able to deploy solutions and to make decisions about which solutions we apply in a much more systematic and thought through way, all done in tandem with the community. So overall, the FRMC is proving to be the thing that drives the heart of what we're doing at the programme, and something which we can be very proud of.